Hello and welcome everyone to this and next episode of We Are Endangered Species. I consider myself a citizen of the world ever since I can remember. I sincerely believe that travel is the number one tool which kills bigotry, homophobia, the fear of the unknown, unintelligence, and therefore I'm a huge advocate of traveling and seeing the world. But can we do that? And if so, for how long? Here's my partner, Zoltan, telling you the reason we are an endangered species today.
And today's reason we are an endangered species is passengers, almost 90 million of whom came to Dubai last year. The first time I landed in Dubai around 25 years ago, it was a desert with some high-rise buildings and a couple of resorts at the seaside. Then Burj Khalifa and hundreds of skyscrapers rose from the sand. It was a mirage in the desert, a vision of the city of the future. Today, that vision is already a reality. The city is a financial and economic hub and one of the most visited cities in the world. In the first quarter of 2025, the number of overnight visitors is already 5.3 million, and it was off-season. So it is pretty easy to see that the number of visitors is exponentially increasing here, but not just here. Last year, 1.4 billion people traveled for tourism on planet Earth, which is an 11% increase compared to the year before. The tourism sector is booming, giving 10% of the global GDP, but also responsible for 10% of global pollution. And how does this affect Dubai? Well, last year, all the visitors spent a staggering $180 billion here. Growth and development are continuous. On the other hand, the weather is changing. The first part of this year was colder and wetter than usual, but now it is already above 40 degrees Celsius, close to 50 in some other parts of the UAE. So summer came early. I do believe that traveling is a good thing, makes one smarter, more open, and even more sensitive to topics like climate change. But all this holidaying is killing the very planet we would like to see and save. Can we stop this? Can we make tourism sustainable? I don't know. But here is someone who probably has a better idea of it. Debbie Clark is joining us from Cape Cod in the USA. Debbie, originally from New Zealand, is the Director of Regenerative Development of the Center for Good Travel with a background in education and counseling. She is dedicated to developing the capabilities of tourism and travel systems to contribute to the well-being of people and natural ecosystems. Good travel is transforming travel for a thriving world. Hello, Debbie. So let's jump in at the deep end. Can we make global tourism sustainable before we completely destroy our planet?
Not if we continue the current model of tourism, right? Which is steeped in a colonial mindset based on a capitalistic, extractive thinking and practices, and that prioritizes tourism's needs over the needs of local community, residents, and ecosystems. So like any sector, this is not just tourism, right, that this applies to. If we continue with business as usual, with just minor sustainability tweaks to the current model, then no. We're not going to make the changes that we need to change in the time that we have left. That's the blunt, honest answer.
Thank you for that. I read research by the University of Queensland, and they said that the greenhouse gas emissions of tourism are growing 2 times faster than any other sector in the economy. And it can double in 20 years, which is, of course, looks terrible looking at it right now. How can we slow that growth without hurting the industry, the tourism industry?
I think that's the wrong question.
Okay.
I think the first part of the question is fantastic, right? How can we slow the growth? But we have to have a complete mindset shift that no longer prioritizes the tourism industry. And those of us in the sector who are saying this are not very popular, as you can imagine. And I think the statistics that you read probably came out of a study. There is a gentleman who just did a talk at one of the biggest travel markets in the world, ITB in Berlin in January, and he was citing those statistics as well. And he was saying that, we have to have brutally honest conversations. We have to talk about the extraction and the damage that the tourism sector is doing to our places, to our planet, to people. And we have to be really honest about how we can make the shifts that we need to make in a way that I think doesn't prioritize the tourism industry per se, but people and life, right? So my perspective is really different. My perspective is that we need a fundamental mindset shift across every sector. And this goes back to our beliefs. And Balazs, you have brought that up in some of the previous interviews you've already done about the mindset and the belief behind our decision making and how we got here. And I think that's the key to making the shifts we need. It doesn't mean that we are eliminating tourism. It doesn't mean that we are saying that everyone in tourism needs to pack up ship and go home. It means that we need a fundamental reset of why we're here on this planet. How can we cultivate the conditions for all life to thrive? And then what's tourism's role in that process?
So that's where you come in, and that's where you are not just so we clarify the terms, it's not sustainable tourism, because as you and I agree, at least, tourism is not sustainable. What you call it is it's regenerative tourism. So for most people who don't know what that term means, could you
including me.
clarify it?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. So, regenerative, I'm going to zoom out a little bit and just talk about regenerative development and design, right? So it's based on nature's principles. So can I even zoom back a little bit more, right? How did we get here? We got here because we have the story now that tells us that we are superior to and separate from nature, right? That we can extract. We have this capitalism that's our religion, and we're all devoted to that. And money and growth drives everything. And that's the story that most of us alive today have been born into. So we don't even question the story. It's just what we know. That's the meaning of life. That's what makes us happy. And because we believe we're separate from nature, we're superior to nature, we believe that we can extract and take what we want when we want and use it, right? And we see this in the tourism sector all the time. We see big multinational corporations that are dropping into places, building big resorts, and there's no consideration for the local ecosystem, the local community. We see this in Hawaii a lot, right? That's why things are starting to change in Hawaii. But so we're zooming back out a bit and we're looking at regeneration is a way of living in harmony with nature's principles. Now, most of us don't know how to do that. So we actually have to learn how to do that. We have to go on this learning journey while we're trying to make changes of understanding ourselves as living systems. So we're all part of webs of life, right? Start with our bodies, our hearts, all of the organs in our bodies, heart, liver, kidneys, they're all part of this interconnected system that makes up our human body. We are a living system, and as the human body, we are embedded in our own families, the living systems of our families, the web of life of our families, embedded in the community we're in. We're all part of these ever larger nested living systems. That's not a story I grew up with, right? That's not that, but that's life, right? When we look back at the billions of years of the evolution of life on this planet, that's what life is. It's these interconnected webs of life that are interreliant upon each other. And there's a potential in all of that interconnectedness when we're working together, when we're in reciprocity and we're working in relationship, we understand we're in relationship with each other, then something larger than the sum of those parts comes together. I think you, Zoltan, talked about one of this example in a previous episode too, the symbiotic relationship between whales and plankton, right? That converts CO2 into oxygen that we need to live on. So it's understanding this interconnectedness at such a fundamental level that we're so blind to usually. We're blind to the complexity of the living systems we live in and that keep us alive, right?
I think it's a beautiful thing that we are not alone as human beings, and I think that's, for me, it's a feeling which relaxes me, that we are a part of a bigger system. We are not just here alone. We could thrive with nature together, and it's good that even whales are on my team, and we are the same team. And it makes me really, relaxed and connected, way more than my mobile phone makes me connected.
You zoom back so far, so wide, that I'm thinking, what you're describing is a religious mindset. In the capitalist mindset is a religious mindset, and the fact that we believe that, or some people believe that humans are sort of above every other species. Um, and that, of course, we took a really huge step back from focusing on tourism. But I guess you're right. So it starts with a mindset change. How optimistic are you that this mindset can in fact change?
I am optimistic actually, and that doesn't mean I don't have, moments or days of despair. But so there's two ways that I sort of bring myself out of despair because the current crisis, and you've talked about this in previous episodes, we're living in a polycrisis with cascading effects that we can't even begin to imagine how fast things are going to unravel. And I'm of the mindset that we are now living in the era of collapse. And so what comes with that is a profound grief, right? And we need to allow ourselves that grief. And again, we often don't talk about it, especially in tourism, we don't talk about it. But yeah, it's profoundly and deeply sad. And so we have to be vulnerable enough to let ourselves feel that collectively. And also we have to so it's acknowledging the enormity of what we're facing, the complexity of what we're facing, the complete unraveling of what we're facing. Acknowledging that
Honestly, as
grief.
you talk, Debbie, I'm sorry to cutting in, but I just can't help it. I have tears coming into my eyes. What you're saying is the absolute truth about what's happening, and the biggest problem in the world that most of the people don't are not aware of this, and they don't feel what I feel now as I listen to you, and as I just tap into that feeling of grief. Yeah, sorry. Just
No, and you're right, and we're not a culture that does well with grief, right? As well, I mean, I'm talking from a white Western culture. We don't wanna talk about grief, we don't wanna talk about dying, we run away from it. But it's part of the cycle of life, and so on a basic level of the things we grieve about in our lives, we don't really even make space for that. When a person dies, how many days bereavement leave do you have? Three days. It's outrageous. So these are all part of the mindset shift that needs to happen. That we need to allow ourselves the space to grieve, and that allows us, and that's not going to go away because we are facing such catastrophic changes, but we can move through that grief, or we can keep revisiting that grief and then enable that or use that to channel that into action. And grief without action, I think one of your previous guests said that's also something about, I can't remember exactly her words, but we need to have the action as well. And we need to have hope because your original question, I think, was about optimism. And so I fuel my own optimism by stepping outside and looking at nature because nature is always evolving. Nature is always working towards more life. And we are nature, and we've forgotten that, right? We've like for tens of thousands of years, humans lived in harmony with nature. It's just only the last, I don't know, since the Industrial Revolution, Agricultural Revolution, that the story's changed. So this is deep within us. This is why you're responding, Zoltan, because it's your heart that knows a more beautiful world is possible, right? To quote
and
Kanye.
life is the most amazing thing which could happen to us, and which could happen to any creature in this world.
Yeah.
I always say the world is beautiful. It's people I have a problem with. But in this day and age, when we get 3 days of leave for the grief of a person, how many days are we gonna get for the grief of human society and the current world as we know it? But every point you're raising is fine, and I want to steer it back a little bit towards the question of traveling. And what I want to get to is like an everyday understanding of, all right, summer season is upon us. People are gonna get on the road. There are low cost airlines. There are very cheap cruises to get on. Obviously, this is not sustainable. What's the alternative people can offer? And because I am aware that we are arguing with a mindset that is religious, so it's nearly impossible to change. And it's the new game show analogy that I can always bring, which is you might have said the right answer on this game show, but the other guy screamed his answer much louder, so he's going to win this point. And then there's somebody else who got very offended by it, so they're going to get a bonus point. So no matter how right you are, what's the simplest way you can try to explain to these people who scream louder and get offended that what's the best way for them to travel and what is it they should and should not do when they do travel?
So again, I'm going to challenge your question
Right?
because it's a question that comes from the mindset that we're doing the right thing and everyone else is not. And I think that's one of the risks and dangers if we're to try and cross the gap, right? To engage others in this process and this new mindset and new ways to think about tourism. We need to develop our own thinking. We need to become aware of the stories we're telling that are shaping this narrative of like bucket list tourism and last chance tourism and collapse tourism, because that's the thing now, right? Everyone's rushing to these fragile places. We haven't even talked about over tourism, but I'm sure we will get there. So if we can start to make those changes ourselves, I think so. There's many levels, right? So I'm talking mostly about a personal level first, and so when we talk about tourism, this speaks to both the tourism side of it, and the supply side or the host side. So when we talk about tourism, we don't want to talk about tourists and suppliers anymore. We want to talk about guests or visitors and hosts, right? So that language, even a shift in that language, changes the mindset a little bit already. Because travel is fundamentally the essence of travel is about us, if we're the travelers, being in a new place, having new experiences with new people. It's a relational experience. At least that's the essence of travel. It's perhaps not what mass tourism has become, right? I think that's what you're alluding to, Balazs, is the mass tourism is me getting the Insta shot in front of the iconic place, right?
Yeah.
And then hashtagging that, so now that place becomes super over touristed. Everyone wants to go there.
Yeah.
So if we're trying to develop a mindset that is aligned with how life works, then we understand that we're all interconnected and what we do has consequences. That we're all part of these living systems, and even if those consequences are on the other side of the world, we have ripple effects. This is also the beautiful thing about this mindset, is we don't have to be the person to solve every problem, because if everyone's starting to adopt this mindset, then we are all working in our own little webs of life, and in fact, that's the only scale at which we can work to regenerate places and people isn't on ourselves and at the scale of place. That's we can come back to that, Balazs, because I can see your question. But it's about trying to create a sector, and this is happening. This is where I am optimistic. People are starting to realize, communities are starting to realize that they need to have a say in how tourism happens in their place. This is what the protests are about, right? This is what the people standing at the cruise ports are about. We don't want you here. So tourism happens in a place, that encounter between visitor and host happens in a place, and that place is people's homes. And we've forgotten that. So as a visitor, we need to start remembering that. It's like, why would you invite someone over for dinner? Our friend Michelle Holiday says this. Why would you invite someone over for dinner if they're going to trash your place? You're not going to do that, right? So the same thing applies to this massive sector or industry we call tourism. Fundamentally, it's about me coming to your home and you hosting me in your home.
I would like to share two examples of reaction to over tourism. Let's see if these are solutions. One is, of course, the Venice fee to enter Venice if you're not spending a night in Venice. It was €5 started at €5 this year. It's going to come back €10 a day per person. That's one example, one way to go. The other way, which I really loved, is the Wadi Rum example in Jordan, in beautiful Valley of the Mu. The government decided that this conservation area should be handled and overseen, and all tourism should be overseen by the people who lived there originally, the Bedouins. And what they do is basically serve as guides. They give you, food, but there are no five-star restaurants or hotels. You can sleep in tents inside Wadi Rum, and but they don't let any big brands or small brands or corporate brands inside their conservation area. Are these ways to go? Are these solutions for us, which should be followed in other countries, other conservation areas, or cities which are facing the effects of over tourism?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So they're both very different approaches. So the Venice approach is obviously using some levers or structures to put in place to cap or to charge for visitation. And I think that is a lever that governments can pull. It's a mechanism. The Wadi Rum, and I hadn't heard of this, and I'm super excited because I traveled there like about 30 years ago, when there was not a lot of tourism, and we did have, we were really hosted by the Bedouin women in the tent. It was amazing and so real. And so hearing that this is what they're doing, this is a beautiful example of putting the power in the hands of the community, and the rightful people there to make those decisions by the sounds of it, and hosting on their terms. That is exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about a regenerative approach, right? It's like, who's in this place? Who are the rightful owners in this place, or the rightful hosts to tell their stories on their terms and to host on their terms. And as visitors, we need a shift in our expectations, right? We need to leave behind all of that sort of colonizing mindset that a lot of us have grown up with unconsciously. And what is a five-star experience? That's a five-star experience to me. It's not a posh hotel. It's not hot running water on demand. It's not all of those things that we typically equate with a five-star luxury experience, but you can't get any more meaningful and authentic than that. And I know those are words that are bandied around in tourism all the time, overused, but that really is, if it's on their terms and they're choosing what part of their culture they're sharing, how they're sharing it, when they're sharing it, what food they're serving, if they're sourcing their food locally, then that all is contributing to them to, I'm sure that I know with some of the indigenous tour operators we work with in New Zealand, or hosts we work with in New Zealand, we all slip back into that mechanistic language. It's a work in progress. We're all a work in progress, right? The hosts we work with in New Zealand, um, it's really about them creating models. Many of them are creating models that are really trying to revitalize their culture, and part of that is truth telling on their terms. So this is the shift that needs to happen. It needs to be community led. Community voices need to be at the forefront.
What you're talking about is very much, you know, I'm going to use an economic term to make it simple, but it's supply driven. So the people who are the welcoming hosts have to change this, because quite frankly, the travelers themselves, by and large, and I'm generalizing obviously, but you said it yourself, it's the hashtag generation, right? So, and not just the younger generation, by the way, everybody is now into that, is for mass tourism. So like, what's the conservation area in Las Vegas? Like, seriously, what are we conserving there, Because God knows it's not the Cherokee or the other Indian tribes or Native American tribes that own the land. It's whoever is there right now. So we can't conserve that. Jumping back to why I smiled when you were talking about those things, it wasn't because I had a question. It was because I remembered, and it's the moment of truth and revelation, that Debbie, who I have a hard time calling Debbie because she's Miss Clark, she was my seventh grade English teacher, had a sign. You had a sign on the classroom. We had many signs, but one of the signs was think global, act local. And yeah, you did. Well, I do. And you just basically said the same thing again, just different words. So that was the
Yes.
reaction.
By the way, Debbie, you did a really good job with this gentleman. As an English teacher.
If anything you've ever heard, thanks. If anything is bad, that's my fault.
I would like to reflect on both what both of you said, and I think it's really good to tie these things together into one circle. That if the host changes, like the Bedouin example, the generation hashtag changes. And I've seen that live. That people, when you're hosted by a Bedouin, you don't throw away your waste because this is someone's home. But in a five-star hotel, there are people to clean after me, so I do whatever I want because I pay the big bucks. And I think that's a great thing that I haven't seen a piece of trash in Wadi Rum, uh, and people were behaving. People didn't want cocktails in the evening. They got their tea and they were happy with it. They didn't want a 5-star meal because they loved sitting there under the 1 million stars instead of the 5 stars. And they were not demanding tourists anymore, but guests, real guests of the Bedouin. And I love that hosts change guests or visitors as well. So that's just wanted to reflect on that. And I also like the Venice example because Venice is unbearable as a tourist destination. High season, it was just like Super Bowl, taking the ball to the end zone just to get to St. Mark's or go on a tour. It was not enjoyable anymore. So I think that's also a good example. And while we are at it, and I want to open this because Balazs mentioned the low budget airlines. So there is another research about aviation and aviation's, of course, role in tourism, and it's they come to the conclusion that the only way to stop this is a think tank called ENT, and they are a tourism and energy think tank, and they came to the conclusion that airlines should increase the prices of their flight tickets radically in the forthcoming years to kind of filter some tourists because it's too much. 1.4 billion traveling for tourism in a year in the world is really too much. And we should not like get rid of 10%. We are talking about halving that 1.4 billion. And which would, of course, put the industry on its knees. But maybe this is the way to go. I'm a big fan of this solution. Maybe things should be more expensive. And that's an easy solution for everything in the world because we are so amazed by the power of money that it's easy to draw a red line with money. What do you think about that, Debbie?
Yeah, that's a challenging one. Yeah, I'm just thinking that through, right? Because I think there's no easy solutions, and I don't want to pretend that I'm some expert on a box with, with my off the shelf best practice answers to everything because that's not how things work. I do think, I think we have to ask the question about flying and we're recognizing if the context that we're saying we're operating in is one that is collapsing. It's a context of planetary 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries we've crossed, right? So we're talking about systems collapse. So what's the role that tourism should play in that context? And the role we believe the role is it should be trying to regenerate all life. And I keep coming back if that's the belief system we're holding. And I know it's not the belief system of everyone, but that's the belief system of someone who's trying to work regeneratively, right? And who's trying to follow regenerative tourism principles. So you can't say you're working regeneratively and then encourage people to be flying all over the world and offering really low budget flights because that is going to encourage more and more tourism. And we have to start asking these questions. And so I'm not going to give an answer to you, but I'm gonna to your question because I don't think that's the right way to go. I think in the sector we have to start being really courageous and really vulnerable and be willing to ask the question you just asked and to talk about it. Is what can we do here to try and shift things because we are living those of us that travel are the privileged few, right? The statistics I think are super low of those of us that travel. I think it's like only 2% of the global population that travels. And yet we're responsible for this huge emissions, and other issues too. It's not just carbon emissions. And I just want to make sure that, we're so focused on carbon emissions. And yes, that's a massive there's so many more issues that we need. If we could, I always like the question if we stopped carbon emissions today, would the world be a great place to live? Would there be social justice? Would there still be poverty? So we can go down the road of all these other questions. We're talking about regenerating all life. And so our budget airlines and flying around the world, is that helping us to regenerate all life? So how do we start to have these conversations, right? We need to have people who are, saying what I'm saying, which is so unpopular in our sector. I'm from New Zealand. New Zealand, the whole New Zealand tourism industry relies on long haul travel. And long haul travel is one of the biggest emitters. So, our practice at the Center for Good Travel has been, if we're going to encourage people to fly across the world, then what we encourage them to do, or what we provide for them to do when they get there, better be helping to regenerate life once they're there. So it's a really uncomfortable place, if we're being really honest. Those of us that are in tourism, we're the elephant in the room, And do I believe that tourism has massive benefits? Absolutely. Zoltan, I heard you talking about traveling with your child on the episode about kids. And yeah, tourism opens our minds and opens our eyes, and when we're in that novel place, we have the potential to think differently. We have the potential to see different ways of living, like in the Bedouin camps. This is the potential of travel. And so, can we still offer those types of experiences without flying across the world for them?
So my tactic with my son, I have actually a strategy to make it less damaging for the environment when we travel, because we travel a lot. We never go for a couple of days. We go If we go to a place, we stay longer. I never choose big brand hotels at these places. I try to find family-run boutique hotels, great service, more privacy, and more in my alley, up my alley. And we try to cover as much of the area around where we go as we can, so that we don't have to travel back again because we didn't see something which should be seen there, and which is amazing. So that is my strategy. It's not a very witty thing to do. It's not, you don't have to do some complex reorganizing of your trip to do this. It takes a bit more time to organize it like this. And and I I'm I just, it's good, and I don't feel guilty for it, because I try to keep it, and I'm not pumping money into the corporates, and also not promoting big resorts over local family-run beautiful places. And so that's my strategy. And I don't know if it's good. It's good for me. It works for me. I feel it, but I don't know if generally you see a trend that people who have like more taste for traveling, or more hunger to see cultures and be tourists in a more immersive way. Do you see that trend, that people try to organize more to hurt nature less?
Yeah, there definitely is that trend. There is still, however, sadly, too many people that are just going for the all-inclusive resort, right? And I'm not trying to shame that. But if that all-inclusive resort was owned locally and the money from that all-inclusive resort was going back into the local community, great. That's a different conversation. So I think to travel consciously, yeah, we need to be really understanding the consequences, or the costs, the invisible costs of how we travel. And so what you're choosing to do, Zoltan, is trying to minimize those costs. You're trying to keep the money in the local community. You're trying to have real experiences with local hosts. You're being very open and wanting to understand that culture, right? Because that's why you go. That's why most of us, hopefully, travel, is because we want to open our mind to new and different experiences, and sort of push our understanding a little bit. So if we can travel with that mindset, and with those criteria ourselves, I think it really helps. I will give a shout out to one organization that I'd love you to put in the show notes, because they are doing really great work with helping travelers understand a better way to travel, and that's the Rise Travel Institute. And they actually have an ebook you can download called Decolonizing Travel, and it's amazing because it really talks about how it helps us think. The privileged few of us that travel, because it is the privileged few, right, that are traveling. When we talk about we are gonna continue traveling, until there is massive collapse, I think. So how can we do it in a way that is really going to contribute, local community, and hopefully not only develop the local community, but develop some of our thinking too and our own understanding that we can bring back with us to our own communities.
I think we are back at sort of where we started with the mindset again. So unless we get the message across for everybody, including those who prefer the big resorts, and the seventh Disney resort just opened in, I think it was Abu Dhabi, somewhere, whatever. So unless we get it across, yeah. So unless we get it across that, boarding a 3-day cruise is probably not the right idea in the middle of the Caribbean. So you just need, I guess, don't leave people at the side of the road. Talk to them and try to, like you said, but we need more talking points to that. You are talking about a destination-centered tourism, I think, rather than a tourism that focuses on the traveler or the passenger herself, right? Because
Yeah.
right now, when a person travels, they travel for the entertainment, the food, the comfort, whatever the goal of that particular traveler or passenger is. Because that's what the industry has been built on. So, what would we call a tourism industry that doesn't have the passenger's best interest in mind, or we have to explain to the passenger, but this is not your best interest. What you think you want is not what you really actually need.
Yeah,
You know, and
no, just saying that to someone is not going to work, right?
I mean,
Gosh, this is not really what you want. This is what you should do. We know that doesn't work, but you're absolutely right. That yeah, let me dig into that a little bit.
please, I'm talking from I'm talking from a screenwriter perspective, because after all, that's my profession. But a character has an internal and an external goal, and basically the story moves forward until the low point in the story, which is up until that point, the character is chasing something that he thinks he wants.
Yeah.
And at that point, there's a break in his story. He hits the low point, he hits rock bottom, and poof, the realization comes on, and he realizes what it is that he actually needs. And that's the inner goal. And from that moment on, we hit on and we start going for the conclusion of the story. And that's how things change for the better. And we usually end up having a happy ending. Now,
Hero's
can
journey.
we do that here?
Yeah. Okay, there's a lot in here to dig into. Let's hold on to storytelling because I don't want that to get lost. So if we don't come back to, let's make sure we come back to that. But yeah, so we're talking about supply side and community driven first, right? Are we going to change travelers' mindsets? There is a growing trend, as you mentioned, Zoltan, of travelers who want this, but there's also a intention behavior gap. Right. So we know we want this. I, as a traveler myself, at times want to travel a certain way, but then when I'm in a place, things are not going right. We default back to old habits or whatever's easiest or convenience. So if this change can happen at the community level on the supply side, and we are starting to see it in a lot of places. There's a lot of destinations in New Zealand, places in New Zealand that are doing this now. And it's really fantastic to see this shift really happening. Hawaii is starting to make the shift. Different destinations are starting to make the shift where they're saying, this is who we are, and this is what we celebrate. This is what we treasure. This is what's important for us, and this is what we need to thrive. So we're going to put out this story. This is who we are. If this resonates, then come visit with us. Come and stay with us. So when a community is starting to identify who they are and what they need to thrive, then they can send that invitation to like-minded travelers. So, the ultimate goal is we get fewer and fewer destinations that are just giving the mass tourism experience, because residents live in those places. So we need to empower the residents to have a really critical role in this. I mean, if we could all be as empowered as the Bedouin, how amazing would that be? Like, that's such a beautiful story. Um, so okay, I lost my train of thought. We were going with the supply side. Oh, and then right, so inviting the visitors that will align, right, with that, and that are wanting to come into your place. Um, and then there was something else you said,
Also about the storytelling that you said you didn't want to get.
yeah. Couple of different things on storytelling. So zooming way out, we need a new story for humanity, I believe, and it's not just me saying this. Much smarter people than me are saying this and have been saying this for a long time. We need a story that shows that we are all living systems embedded in webs of life. And so what comes with that is this responsibility for us to take care of those webs of life, contribute to them, and be nourished in return. And there is beauty in that because it's about life thriving, right? So that's the biggest story. What's the story of tourism in that? Well, tourism can contribute to thriving of places and people. And when we're centering the community thriving, actually the visitor has an amazing experience. I think a more richer experience than sitting in an all-inclusive resort that could be in any place in the world. Because a regenerative approach really values what's unique in the place. It's not about homogenization, it's not about standardization, it's about what's unique about this place that we can help bring to life. And so as a visitor when you go, I know, like, I had an experience in Vermont last year, 2 years ago. We went to this community, the Mad River Valley, and people there were such an interconnected, interreliant community that I experienced it. We experienced it as soon as we arrived. The way our host was introducing us to other people in the community, the way he drove us up to this farm to table restaurant because the roads were too muddy for our little Fiat. You know, it's reciprocity. It's in, and I came away in love with that place. The weather was horrific. It was the worst weather ever. I could tell a big story about this, but it's the feeling you get when you're in these places and you're like, there's something magic here. What is this? What is it about this place that makes me feel so um, alive? When I think about that, it's just this human connection and this connection to nature as well. And so we can create those experiences, and then we need to tell stories about them. We need to tell stories about what's happening when the visitor's there. And we need to so as the hosts, we need to share stories of our place and what we care about. And those of us that are also storytellers, like you are and like we're doing as well, we need to uplift those stories and we need to amplify those stories because those are the stories that paint a new picture for everyone to be able to see what we can live into.
And I do agree. Think storytelling is in the center of this. And now, since I'm standing here in Dubai, one of the top destinations of the world, and behind me, the beautiful Arabian Gulf and Jumeirah Beach, there is something amazing happening in Dubai, which most of the people have no idea about who come here. There is the regeneration of the coast going on. It's a 70 billion US dollar project and goes on for decades. And when I first came here, this was Dead Sea, like with very high sodium levels, and you could feel it on your skin that this is there's too much salt in the Arabian Gulf or this part of the Arabian Gulf. There was absolutely no life in it. Yesterday, I was swimming with in the evening with a whole lot of fish in there, and so life is coming back to the UAE coast, and it's an amazing project. And it's not in the tourism story of Dubai. People come here for the luxuries, the shining gems and bling of Burj Khalifa, all these high tech things, the Alain behind me. They love those, the gourmet food, and then the flashy resorts, which are very Instagrammable, the most Instagrammable places here, Atlantis, the water park, and everything. And they go out maybe to the desert for a 5-hour tour, and then a bit of a, I don't say lame, but with a cheap version of local culture with a little dancing and some food, some barbecue food, and that's it for them. And there's so much in this country people should see. Like UAE is fantastic. It's not just Dubai. There's so much Hatta, amazing. If you go up to the Omani border, Hatta, the mountains, the lakes, and everything. The desert with the oases, the conservation area in Ras Al Khaimah is beautiful. The Antiquarter, the biggest desert outside of Africa in the world, is the Antiquarter at Abu Dhabi. Beautiful. Tom Cruise shot 2 movies there. It's just an amazing place to be at. And it's not on the tourist routes. It's people don't even know that it exists. People know the Burj Khalifa, and that's the problem of marketing. That's the problem of storytelling, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. And the stories that get shaped by who, right? So who's actually creating the stories, and what is their goal with what they're trying to narrate in those stories? What's the image that they're trying to sell? And I think that's been a massive problem in tourism historically, is who's writing what stories. And very often it's tourism boards or tourism marketing entities that are writing stories that have no connection with what the reality on the ground is, or it's all the shiny bling, and they're not talking about, because it's all about selling, right? It's all about selling and getting more. It's a growth mindset that if we can sell this beautiful version of what this place is, and that gets fixed in people's minds, people will come for that thing. And that's a growth driven mindset, right? That's all about volume and numbers. So it's not about authenticity of who this place uniquely is and who the people are there in that place.
So we are back at the mindset change. I 100% agree with you. We need to change those mindsets. I believe, um, because the climate has changed, the world has changed. We need to change with it. Um, they're about who's writing stories. It's less and less the institutions. By the way, I do believe it's last night or 2 nights ago, whenever the Met Gala was in New York, they posted this photo from the bathroom, and there's like 15 people on it. It's a selfie, and they're all smiling in their funky clothes, and they say, "Oh, our annual bathroom selfie from the Met Gala." I did not know a single soul in that photo. I shit you not. And I have no idea who they are. And collectively, they have something like 3 billion followers. And it's those voices that get through. I'm sorry, but if you drop one of their names, I'm sure they're going to get more replies than, Dostoevsky, because yeah, well, that's the reality that we live in. So until these people are the ones shaping the stories, Zoltan, then the Burj Khalifa will be known, and no, the empty city won't be known. It's that simple.
You're absolutely right, right? The influencers, Instagrammers and influencers now, social media influencers is a massive thing. And so what comes with that, if they're trying to just make money and get free travel, then the stories they're going to tell are going to be very different than if they have a real conscious mindset about their responsibility and how they're telling their stories. I'm going to uplift Rise Travel Institute again. They've got courses for content creators of travel that really centers around the ethics of the stories you're telling, and how you should be creating stories that are only yours to tell, and giving the permission to people to tell the stories whose stories they are to tell.
Really.
Not giving permission, but recognizing that you're only responsible for your own stories. But there's so much in that about ethical storytelling. And so again, I think it's up to the communities to be pushing back on that and saying, no, that's not the story we want told about our place. If you're an Instagrammer or a blogger coming here, then you need to be telling the stories that we want told about our place. So there's massive responsibility in that, and also massive opportunity and potential for creating the right kind of stories that are going to bring the right kind of visitors into that community and contribute in a way. Like we all have responsibility and opportunity to contribute in a way that helps life thrive. And so if we keep coming back to that, because it's back to you're right, Zoltan, Balazs, it's the mindset piece, right? It's the mindset. We keep coming from this growth, money, greedy capitalistic mindset. And it's a work in progress for all of us to try and shift that and come back to what matters. I know it might sound that I'm speaking quite theoretical, but there are really practical examples of this happening on the ground, and those are the examples that we need to share and amplify, so people can start to see there's a different way for us to be in this world. There's a different way for us to travel.
And it's we need to give up on the individualism, because that's the thinking of the ego-centered kind of like, I need to be pampered and I paid for this, so you better service me and blah blah blah. That's not gonna fly. So like,
Yeah.
um,
100%.
yeah,
And that comes from us not recognizing that we're living beings and that we're not interconnected. We are just like any other animal on this planet, we need clean water to drink, we need clean air to breathe, we need healthy food to eat. We're not exempt from those rules of nature.
I wanted to reflect on what you were saying, and I think the mindset change, it can happen really easily sometimes. Like, and while we are at Dubai, and I'm going to do some corporate shaming afterwards, a bit of it, but while we are in Dubai, when I used to live here for a while, and when people were coming, I took them to the so-called old Dubai area, the Deira area, right around the fort, and they didn't know that something like that existed here. They just thought it's all skyscrapers and no old charm, older charm here, like what you see very which is very kind of there in Oman, that you still feel that old Arabian word charm. So, and that changed the visitors completely. And if this would be on the linear tourist route, that it's kind of mandatory to go out there, that you see how Dubai was when it was not Dubai, when there was no Dubai actually, then then it would be a quick mindset adjustment. And now I'm going to go into the corporate shaming part, and so I try to kind of summarize a couple of things. So 50% of all the emissions is, of course, transportation. And among transportation, most of it is coming from aviation and coming from the cruise ships. When we look at five-star resorts or four-star resorts and all-inclusive travel, it has the biggest carbon footprint and biggest footprint on everything, which is wrong for the planet. But we still let them to greenwash this, like all airlines promoting themselves as the greenest airlines, and there is no punishment for it. What's the greenest airline? Until it flies, it's not green. And let's get to, that's the truth. When you are putting your towels, and they say save the world by choosing your towels and putting them on the floor if you don't need it, because because the laundromat is killing Earth. It's just not true. It's not the guests who are killing Earth. It's not the people who go on cruise ships not because they are evil, but price is really good for cruise ships, and you get an all-inclusive service, and you see 11 countries in 7 days. Uh, so it's when we and everywhere we look in climate change, every sector, it all comes back for me to one place: big corp and big money. And because it's huge money, 10% of global GDP is tourism. Uh, and okay, that this is a polluting thing, and we need travel, and we love travel. But why are we letting to put their tags of being green or being environmentally conscious, why they are not, and making visitors guilty of using one more towel a day than they should have? While they put on every light even when the room is not occupied, because they want the shiny building to look good after sundown, and they want to show it to you with all lights up because the room looks really good with all lights up. So, and I could go on and on and on with these examples. That is, they are not just polluting it, which is in a way understandable because there is demand for travel, but we let them behave and pose as they were the shining knights for nature. Why they are not? They're shining knights for the 10% of global GDP. So
Yeah.
can we change that mindset, or is just it can only happen with regulations change?
Yeah, my response to that is not very hopeful with the mass tourism market, what I call that mass tourism market. I think we're in a phase that I wanna call predatory delay, and that people are still trying to extract as much value, monetary value from the system while they can, making tweak you know, so, you know, is using less water and using less towels and, recycling, are all those things important? Absolutely. They're not regenerative, they're not creating more life, they're just doing less harm, right? So, I think what you're talking about is sort of the tweaking around the edges of a system that's fundamentally hasn't changed, so that we can say we're making these incremental steps. And, um, with any system, in order for it to change dramatically, it's the mindset that has to change first. And I think we're not going to change the mindset of a lot of people in the sector. Like, I hate to say that out loud because it sounds defeatist. Really believe we're not gonna change the mindset of a lot of people who are there just to extract monetary value, until we see some massive systems collapse and they can no longer physically do what they're doing. I mean, the speaker I mentioned, Stefan Gosling, I think his name was, from Sweden. He called this out at ITB, the big travel market, and he basically said, mass tourism started 80 years ago, and in another 80 years there'll be no tourism. We're in the end of an era. We're in the end of the tourism era. And so I'm a- and I and for me, so part of this regenerative thinking is that we each need to find what we can do. What's mine to do? So I no longer am interested in trying to shift the big mass tourism players because I've seen it with my eyes. I've gone to these big travel markets, and they're not interested in changing. But in those big travel markets, we're having now these regenerative tourism segments and or summits, and there's the people are lining up out the doors. That's who I want to work with, because I feel like, have you seen the Burkana Institute's two loops models, two loops of a systems transition? There are people clinging to that old model who will keep clinging to it as much as they can. There are people hospicing that old model who are taking the good from that model, and I think there's so much good in travel, right? It's about those encounters and those exchanges with each other, and so what can we take from travel that will serve us as we create a new system? And so I'm really interested in having the conversations. Like, I don't believe me and this podcast and us having this conversation is gonna change that big extractive industry as it exists. Um, and so I'm just gonna name it and say, I don't think it's gonna happen until it collapses. I hate to say that, but I think that's the truth. I would love to be proved wrong, and I think are there great people in those corporations? Absolutely. Are there amazing sustainability people in those corporations trying to do good? Yeah, there are. I'm interested in working on building a new system. So the part that excites me is, what is it about tourism or travel, or those of us in travel? Because a lot of us, the small business people, the Bedouins, all of us that are those little guys in travel, we're in this sector because we love our place. We want to share that place with other people, and we really believe in the power of travel and new and different experiences to open our minds, right? So it's all of those things that those of us that love traveling, why we travel. So, what are those key ingredients that we can think about creating a new model in a world of collapse? What is it about those of us in the sector that love hosting visitors, um, that can create something new? So, I want to share an example briefly. There's a woman in Sweden, Lena, where is she? I'll have to give you the link. Bottelborg, I think is the name of her organization. So she bought this old manor, she renovated it, and now it's all about growing food locally, working with local refugees and immigrants to help them integrate into the place, sharing their cooking styles. They got cooking classes, sharing their cultures. They do work training. They have a garden there, like a farm to table food experience. So they host weddings, but they bring school programs in to work in the garden. They bring elderly in to work with children in the garden. Like, there's so many things she's tapping into in the community, and she's working with she's a real network hub in the community, helping refugees and immigrants develop a relationship with the place, helping residents in that place develop a relationship with the new people coming into their place. Don't you think we're going to need that in the future? She's such a magical example that just I become so enlivened when I think about her or talk about her work. That's where the hope is. That's what we need. And I know we're talking on micro scale and we all want to sort of fix the big macro issues in the system. But and yes, big corporations and those with power and money have a lot to answer for. What's mine to do? What's mine to do is to try and uplift the stories of Lena and others who are trying to already work into this world of deep adaptation and transition. And what's tourism's role in that context? That's where I find hope.
So just like the sign on the wall said in 7th grade, think global, act local. Thank you for being with us, Debbie.
Thank
Thank
you guys so much for what you're doing. Keep doing it because we need these conversations, right? Each of us needs to find what it is that we can do, and you're doing it in your way. The more we talk about this, the more we can change the narrative.
For reasons that elude me, we have all booked a yearly travel around the sun in the Milky Way on a planet rotating at just the right speed with just the right gravity and the perfect atmosphere for all elements that our species requires to survive the journey. Globally, you're looking to make this trip on average of 77 times, but you're fucking it up for yourself and for everyone else traveling with you. Imagine if we're all doing this trip in a car. Let's say there's 5 of us and we all produce an average of 2.2 kilos of trash per day and drink an average of 1 liter of water per day and use another 308. That's 4 tons of trash and nearly 700,000 liters of water a year in that single car. Now, imagine if you can't throw it out and you can't get new water. That's pretty much what we're doing. Increasing the amount of shit we carry, reducing the resources on which this whole trick runs, diluting our drinking water, hooking a tube up to the exhaust, and I think on top of it all, the soundtrack is getting pretty shitty too. If you believe we've still got a long time before the gas runs out, or one of us dehydrates, or someone starts beating the driver, or the backseat passengers start a fight and Spotify goes offline because we're driving in Spain and there's a massive grid failure, you're wrong. It's happening right now. If you're looking for absolution or a message of hope, you gotta look further, beyond the horizon, if we ever make it there.